Tonight at 10, Kyiv under attack as Russian troops could be as close as 12 miles from Ukraine's capital. Parts of the city came under a barrage of airstrikes overnight, damaging residential buildings and streets. NATO condemned Russia's actions.
President Putin's decision to pursue his aggression against Ukraine is a terrible strategic mistake, for which Russia would pay a severe price for years to come.
Russian armoured vehicles were filmed entering the capital. Ukraine's president tells his people that only they can protect their country.
This morning we are alone in defending our country, just like yesterday. The most powerful forces in the world watch from afar.
Soldiers try to maintain order at Kyiv's railway station as people try to flee. Across the country, people say they're worried.
I'm scared for my life, for my kids. I'm scared for my country. But this is, the fear that is transformed into anger.
And stay with us on BBC News for continuing coverage and analysis from our team of correspondents in the UK and around the world.
Hello, good evening. Welcome to an extended BBC News at 10. The outskirts of the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv, are tonight under Russian attack. The country's president, Volodymyr Zelensky, has urged the army to stand firm in the face of the assault, saying it's all the country had. He said the international community has left his nation to fight alone, and he urged civilians to help defend their country. Russia's President Vladimir Putin called on the Ukrainian military to seize power from its own government. Let's take a look at some of today's key developments as the full-scale attack took place for a second day. Russian troops are closing in on the capital. Their military vehicles have been filmed entering the city, and in the last few hours, multiple explosions have been reported. Exact figures are unknown, but there are reports of large numbers of Ukrainian casualties, both military and civilian, since the invasion began, and of Russian military deaths. Streams of people in cars and on foot have been crossing from Ukraine into Poland, Romania and Hungary. The UN Refugee Agency believes up to 5 million people may try to flee abroad. There's fierce fighting in many parts of the country, with Russian troops advancing from the north, from the east and from Crimea in the south. But tonight, all eyes are on Kyiv. There have been exchanges of fire in the north of the city, which was reached by an advance party of Russian troops. Ukrainian authorities say 18,000 machine guns have been handed out to volunteers who want to defend their capital, while Russia claims it's taken control of the Hostomel airfield to the northwest of the city, important for international cargo and a key military airbase. In our first report tonight, our correspondent Nick Beak looks at the day the nation's capital came under attack.
The early sirens wailed in Ukraine's capital once more. But this was no rude awakening. No one had been able to sleep. The latest Russian bombardments had hit yet more homes, injuring the very civilians the Kremlin promised had nothing to fear from what it calls a targeted attack on the Ukrainian military. As we make our way through Kyiv, we find volunteers now bearing arms to protect their country. We soon see signs of a battle drawing ever nearer, as well as those bracing themselves for a last stand. Of all the places to get a flat tire, Alina's family now caught between Ukrainian artillery and the Russian front line. Elena says the whole family is very afraid and can't now go back to their home. And this is why. What do you think of what Vladimir Putin is doing to the Ukrainian people?
Що ви думаєте, що Путін робить в
This is him, Elena's mother tells me. You can hear the artillery. That is outgoing fire from Ukrainian forces. That family has just left. The fear here is that very soon Russian forces will be making their way down here to take the capital. At the same time, Ukraine's president was trying to reassure a nation, pleading with the world to help them.
For the second day, our cities experienced rocket and bomb strikes. Masses of tanks as well as airstrikes, which are similar to those which Europe has already seen during the Second World War and about which it said never again. But this is now how it is. It happens again.
President Putin urged the military he was attacking to turn on their own government.
I appeal to the servicemen of the armed forces of Ukraine. Do not let neo-Nazis and Ukrainian ultra-nationalists use your children, wives and the elderly as human shields. Take power into your own hands.
Ukraine is under attack on many fronts. In Mariupol, in the southeast, destruction. In Sumy, in the northeast, battles rage. And here in the capital, in circumstances still unclear, horror as a tank drives over a car. Incredibly, the driver survived. And this is a pivotal battleground, an airport northwest of Kyiv. Its fate could be vital to that of the whole country. If the Russians succeed there, this will be one of the first neighborhoods they come through, Podil. Today it looks like any other in Ukraine. This queue is for the pharmacy. Maxim tells us he hopes any advancing Russians would not harm him and his family.
I think they don't take our normal people. I think they have heart inside. They have something good inside.
Elena, a grandmother, says Russian occupation would be a disaster.
This is my city, the city of my parents, my grandparents. I'm not going to leave.
And as for what she makes of Vladimir Putin,
when a person is so inadequate, nobody knows what will come to his mind.
This evening, the mind of President Zelensky was defiant. Speaking from the streets of Kyiv, he posted this message on social media.
We are all here. Our soldiers are here, the citizens are here, and we are here. We defend our independence. That's how it'll go. Glory to our defenders, both male and female. Glory to Ukraine.
Tonight, there is overwhelming support for the men and women being asked to save their country. But there's also a deep fear the effort will not be enough. Nick Beak, BBC News, Kyiv.
Well, we had been hoping to broadcast tonight's programme from the capital, but it is too dangerous to be out on the streets. Let's talk to our chief international correspondent, Lise Doucet. And Lise, as we can see, you, the team, others, having to take shelter tonight in a basement.
This is Kyiv tonight, what was a vibrant European city, nearly 3 million people. But tonight they've gone underground to take shelter, and that includes us. We're in an underground parking garage. Many others are here. We could just show you where we are. The chairs all lined up. Cots have been brought out. You can see the urns of coffee and tea in the distance. This is where we're going to have to take shelter through the night, and we're not sure for how much longer. There were repeated air raid sirens tonight, and then a call from the authorities, including the people running this hotel, take to your shelters and don't come out. The mayor of this city, a famous boxer who has now taken on a military uniform and picked up a gun, he told the citizens of Kyiv this is going to be a difficult night. There was a roar of explosions reverberating across Kyiv tonight. Explosions in the distance, still not in the center, still about 10 miles away. There was also the rattle of gunfire and artillery as well. This was a night so different from last night where these explosions first started. But there's a real worry that as the Russian forces keep approaching the city, while there's fighting in the suburbs, this is just the beginning of what could be a long battle, a battle for this city to survive. And we saw today as we went around the city how war has pulled life from Kyiv. People have taken either to underground shelters like this, or they fled, or they're picking up a gun to fight.
Lise, very many thanks. Do take care. Thank you very much. Lise Doucette there in the capital tonight. Well, as we've been hearing, there is fighting in many parts of Ukraine, while people living in areas awaiting any Russian advance are making last preparations for battle. Our Eastern Europe correspondent Sarah Rainsford reports from the city of Dnipro, strategically important, situated on a river dividing east and west Ukraine.
This is not normal, but it is life now for Anna and her family, ever since Vladimir Putin launched his invasion. The boys don't go to school anymore. Everyone's home, waiting for the war to reach them.
So these small are for kids.
If there's shelling, they're ready to run to the basement.
Just basic stuff like warm clothes, a bottle of water and a snack. I have to keep up my smile for the kids because they are very nervous. They cried yesterday, they're scared. I'm scared for my life, for my kids. I'm scared for my country. But this is, the fear that is transformed into anger, that makes you act, do something to defend your country and to protect yourself.
This is Dnipro, and by daylight things are calm for now. But at 10 p.m, a siren sounds and the street's empty. Until then, there's queues everywhere for cash. The city straddles the vast river that divides Ukraine into east and west. Its bridges reportedly prepped for destruction if Russian tanks get close. The local blood donor centre's working flat out, collecting supplies for any soldiers wounded on the front line. There's been war here in eastern Ukraine for 8 years, but what's happening now is on a whole new scale.
This is a huge queue and people have been standing here all day coming to give blood because they say they want to do their bit to help their armed forces. But the thing that I keep hearing from people in this queue is that they also want the West to do more to help their country.
Sanctions are okay, it helps, and I believe that it will help a lot, but yeah, we need more. That's not enough. We really rely on Europe now. My friend is going there now.
Your friend has to go and fight with Russia?
Yeah, and I don't want to lose them. I don't want to lose my country. I love it so much, you can't even imagine that.
How worried are you about what's happening at this invasion?
Actually, it is quite shocking for me, and right now I'm thinking about taking weapon to my hands, at least to defend my local districts.
Ukraine's now called on everyone to help defend this land, as Russian troops fight their way forward across a country nervous but determined to resist them. Sarah Rainsford, BBC News, in eastern Ukraine.
NATO is sending more troops to reinforce its member nations in Eastern Europe. At an emergency summit, leaders of the Western Military Alliance said Russia's invasion of Ukraine had shattered peace in Europe. And they warned that Moscow would pay a severe political and economic price for years to come. Our diplomatic correspondent James Landale reports on the global response to the crisis.
This is what the defence of Kyiv looks like. Soldiers with guns and armoured vehicles ready to take on the might of Russian tanks and warplanes. Little wonder there's a debate about what more the West can do to help. But these American fighter jets won't be coming to their aid. They arrived in Romania today as part of NATO's decision to beef up its presence in member states close to Russia. So too these British forces arriving in the Baltic state of Estonia. They're there to deter potential Russian aggression against NATO countries. At the headquarters of the military alliance in Brussels, all 30 NATO leaders went further, agreeing for the first time in the organisation's history to activate their rapid response force for collective defence, which means potentially thousands more troops heading to Eastern Europe.
We are deploying elements of the NATO response force on land, at sea and in the air, to further strengthen our posture and to respond quickly to any contingency. There must be no space for miscalculation or misunderstanding. We will do what it takes to protect and defend every ally.
What the West could do is give Ukraine more help like this. These are anti-tank weapons provided by Britain. Downing Street said more support was planned and nothing was off the table. There's clearly a strong appetite here at Westminster and in other European capitals to give Ukraine more military kit to support an insurgency against Russian forces. But ministers are absolutely clear. There'll be no UK troops on the ground, nor a no-fly zone enforced by NATO warplanes.
British and NATO troops should not, must not play an active role in Ukraine. We must all be clear what the risks of miscalculation could be and how existential that could very quickly become.
And here's why. Ukraine might have held a parade for NATO forces last summer, but it's not yet a member. It wants to join, but that won't happen while there's a risk of importing conflict into the alliance, and that could take years to resolve. But look at how far and wide NATO reaches, and the fear is that if NATO forces join the fight in Ukraine, then war could spread across the whole continent.
An attack on one member of NATO is an attack on all members of NATO. The President's been very clear that we will defend every inch of NATO territory. I think that's the most powerful deterrent against President Putin going beyond Ukraine.
But that may be of little solace to the many thousands of people trying to flee Kyiv station, where guards fired warning shots to keep back the crowds. Crowds choosing to head west rather than rely on the West. James Landau, BBC News.
Well, a US draft resolution is due to be put to the United Nations Security Council tonight, saying it deplores in the strongest terms Russia's aggression towards Ukraine. Let's go to UN headquarters and join our correspondent Neda Tawfiq. What's happening there this evening, Neda?
Well, Jane, the meeting is finally underway and the vote will be happening imminently, but it's already been pushed back twice today, I'm told, by diplomats for last-minute negotiations to make sure that China abstains rather than votes against this draft resolution by the United States. The text deplores Russia's aggression against Ukraine. It also demands the immediate withdrawal of all forces from the country. But of course, it is destined to fail, and that's because Russia's privileged position on the Council as one of the Big Five, one of the victors of World War II, it has the privilege to veto any binding resolution that comes before this Council. So as Ukrainians, shelter ahead of Russian missiles dropping and tanks advancing on the capital, this won't make them feel any less alone in this fight. Nevertheless, the United States believes when the votes are counted, it will show that Russia is isolated on the international stage.
Thank you, Neda Tawfiq. Well, in his latest televised speech, Russia's President Vladimir Putin called on Ukraine's military to abandon their government, who he described as terrorists, drug addicts and neo-Nazis. The European Union and UK have announced personal sanctions against Vladimir Putin and Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. From Moscow, here's Steve Rosenberg.
Has the Kremlin's plan become any clearer? For months, Putin kept the world in suspense. Then invasion of Ukraine, now an appeal to Ukrainian soldiers to topple their government.
Take power into your own hands. I think it'll be easier for us to deal with you than with the drug addicts and neo-Nazis that have installed themselves in Kyiv.
The state media is backing the Kremlin's war. Russia's foreign minister tried to justify it.
Mr. Lavrov, let's put euphemisms aside. This is not a special military operation, is it? It's a full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine. How can you possibly justify invading a sovereign nation, your neighbour,
In terms of euphemisms, we've a lot to learn from you Anglo-Saxons. You called the destruction of Iraq a battle for democracy. Russia will ensure the demilitarization of Ukraine.
It's time, the West thinks, for sanctions against Sergei Lavrov and Vladimir Putin. Their foreign assets are being frozen by Britain and the EU. Personal sanctions against Vladimir Putin sends a strong message. It shows that Western leaders view him increasingly as a pariah. But will it make the Kremlin leader change course? Almost certainly not, because President Putin seems determined to continue with his military plan. And here's part of it. This is Belgorod, Western Russia, near the border with Ukraine. A lot of military hardware and activity, and different views on Russia's offensive over the border.
The president explained it all, that they will target military objects only. Of course, it's unpleasant, but there was no other way out.
There is nothing good in it. Everyone has friends and relatives there. I can't find words to express it.
The longer the war continues, the harder it will be to convince Russians that their president took the right decision.
And Steve joins me from Moscow tonight, and we heard about that appeal from Vladimir Putin to Ukrainian soldiers. What did you make of that?
Well, it's certainly a change of tone. Only yesterday, Vladimir Putin was saying to Ukrainian servicemen, lay down your weapons and go back to your families. Today, a very different message. Rise up, seize power, and then we can do a deal with you. Basically, a direct call for a military uprising in Ukraine, a direct call for regime change. Now, throughout today, we've been hearing reports of preparations for possible talks between Moscow and Kyiv. But I have to say there's a lot of skepticism about whether that is possible, especially with the Russian offensive ongoing. And what about Russia itself? Well, Western sanctions might not force a change of course from Vladimir Putin, but one effect they will surely have is to increase Russia's isolation. And the prospect of that is causing a lot of worry for a lot of people here in Russia.
Steve, thank you. Steve Rosenberg in Moscow. Well, the US says more than 200 missile launches, cruise and ballistic, have so far been observed in the battle for Ukraine, but that Russia hasn't yet captured any highly populated areas. Our defence correspondent Jonathan Beale assesses Russia's military strategy and what might come next.
Russia's armoured columns are still rolling, but they're also taking casualties. This day two of their unprovoked invasion of Ukraine, a sovereign, democratic country. Russian units have moved in from multiple directions, from the north, east, and from the south. Their most significant advance so far is from Belarus to the capital, Kyiv. Russia now says it's captured the airport of Hostomel, 20 miles to the north of the city, despite Ukrainian efforts to retake it. Russian troops have also now entered the suburbs of Kyiv itself, in Obolon, to the north of the city. They're also reported to be advancing from the east, but British military intelligence assesses that Russian forces have so far made limited progress, and they've been meeting fierce resistance.
The Russian advance has been slower than expected for multiple reasons. I don't think that they've used their artillery in the same way that they would, and they have quite a lot of axes of advance to prioritise. I also think a key part of it is that they are facing very stiff Ukrainian resistance, which I don't think they expected.
So what is Russia's final objective? It's now clear that Russian troops want to seize the capital, Kyiv, the centre of government. But is Russia's end goal to take the entire country, which is bigger than France? Remember, Russia had around 190,000 troops on the border, enough for an invasion, but military experts question that's enough to occupy the whole of Ukraine. The Dnipro River bisects Ukraine and forms a natural barrier, and Russian attacks are so far focused in the east. So is their goal to take all the territory east of the river? It would certainly give Russia one of its objectives, a land bridge to Crimea, which it invaded in 2014.
If
Mr. Putin's intent was to occupy the whole of Ukraine with a force of 150,000. That would only conceivably work if it had the consent of the population of Ukraine, and it will not. A force of 150,000 is sufficient to defeat the Ukrainian military pretty much wherever it is, but it is not sufficient to occupy by compulsion a country of that size with that number of people who reject their presence. This may be a major miscalculation.
This is just the evidence of Ukraine's resistance outside Kyiv, its second largest city, and just 30 miles from the Russian border. If President Putin really wants to conquer the entire country, has he tried to bite off more than he can chew? Jonathan Beale, BBC News.
Well, let's talk to our political correspondent, Ian Watson at Westminster. And Ian, we heard from Lise earlier, we've heard about the speed of the Russian advance here. So how is that going to be playing out at Westminster over the weekend? What are the concerns where you are?
I'm afraid I have to say, Jane, that Downing Street sources are saying tonight that we should be bracing ourselves for some sickening scenes in the next few days. They've had what's described as ominous assessments from defence and intelligence services, and quite independently, officials have been telling me that if Russian forces continue to face severe, robust resistance, then there is significant concerns that Vladimir Putin will try to win victory by any means necessary. That includes the use of heavy artillery and all the loss of civilian life that would entail. Against that backdrop, many MPs here at Westminster have been calling for more equipment to be sent to Ukrainian forces. They've been calling for a further ratcheting up of sanctions, but tonight Boris Johnson simply couldn't get enough allies to agree to exclude Russia, for example, from the SWIFT financial system. But in the past hour, he's also, following an earlier call with President Zelensky, posted a video on social media in which he expresses solidarity in the Ukrainian language, but he also speaks one line in Russian as well, and he says he doesn't believe that the war is in your name. That's his message to the Russian people. Now, it may well be President Putin who's responsible, but as we've been hearing throughout the programme, it's the Ukrainian people who are in the firing line.
Ian Watson, thank you. Well, the government has given further details about the package of sanctions it is imposing on Russia. And BP is facing pressure to abandon its stake in the Russian state-owned oil and gas giant Rosneft. Our business editor Simon Jack looks now at the impact sanctions might have.
Yesterday, Russian airline Aeroflot was banned from UK skies. Today, BA was banned from Russia. A reminder that in economic warfare, there's an exchange of fire. Sanctions are the weapons the West has chosen, and the UK has laid out its arsenal so far. The 10-point plan also includes freezing Russian banks' UK assets, banning the Russian state or companies from raising money on UK markets, sanctioning 100 companies and individuals, which would include travel bans to the UK, and placing a £50,000 limit on UK bank deposits for Russian nationals. So how powerful a package is this, and what might be the collateral damage?
These sanctions are very significant. The financial relationship between the UK and Russia has been severed, and that will significantly impact the Russian economy and Russian financial institutions, but it will also affect companies in the UK, because companies in the UK who thought they were going to be exporting, I don't know, whiskey to Russia next week will suddenly find that their bank will no longer process that payment. So I don't think we've yet really thought through the consequences of what this means for UK industry.
The UK, France and others have also called for Russia to be excluded from the SWIFT system. It's a network of 11,000 financial firms in 200 countries that facilitate international payments. It's considered among the most damaging sanction that could be imposed, but again, it's not without cost to others. Slap bang opposite the Bank of England is this building, home to VTB, Russia's second biggest bank. Now, pulling firms like this out of SWIFT would be disruptive for Russia for sure, but it would also come at a heavy cost to those companies and countries owed money either now or in financial contracts by Russian companies. It's particularly true of Germany, who have a deep financial relationship with Russia and use the system to pay for 2/3 of their gas supply. That's one reason Germany has so far been reluctant to pull the trigger on SWIFT, though that may change. The conflict and the sanctions will add fuel to inflation, and not just at the petrol pump and in our energy bills.
Well, Russia and Ukraine are major exporters, not just
of oil and gas, but actually foodstuffs, wheat, fertilizers. So that's going to impact the broad food chain. I think it's highly likely now in the UK we'll see inflation reach 8%, which is a number we haven't seen in 30 years.
This evening, BP was put under pressure from government to offload its 20% stake in Russian oil giant Rosneft. BP's boss sits on a board chaired by Putin ally Igor Sechin. It's a grim and uncomfortable paradox that the higher prices for oil and gas rise, the more the countries dependent on it fuel the very Russian war machine they are trying to stop. Simon Jack, BBC News.
The UN's refugee agency says more than 50,000 people have fled Ukraine in the last 48 hours. Many have headed west, trying to cross the border into neighbouring countries. And now there's concern that the steady stream could become a mass exodus. Our correspondent Mark Lowen has been to the Polish border, speaking to people trying to escape.
A border separates, but also brings together. Families reunited in the search for safety, like 10-year-old Maria and her mother, who travelled for 2 days from Kyiv to join her father here in Poland. How do you feel about leaving? Do you feel scared about what is happening?
Yes. I have never thought about this situation, that one day another country in the 21st century could attack another country in Europe.
Your country?
My country.
The stream of Ukrainians crossing this border is increasing. They've lived with the threat from Russia for years, but now, with its leader besieging their homes, they've had to flee. Nadia Slusarenko left her eldest daughter behind to help the army, coming here with her 2 youngest.
Yesterday I woke up because I've heard some noise, and I asked my husband, what is happening? He just looked through the window and said, wow, Russians bombed our airport. So, okay, just pack our bags and you have to save the kids. I love my country. I want to go back. But we cannot stay safe over there.
Poland is welcoming the new arrivals with open arms and is setting up several reception centres. It's been one of the EU's most hardline anti-migrant countries in recent years, but it also knows all too tragically the cost of Russian occupation and hostility. These scenes of seeking refuge across Europe's borders are more associated with the migrant crisis from the Middle East. But now the threat is on the EU's doorstep. And while Poland says that the uptick in arrivals so far is modest, it warns that it could become the largest refugee wave since 2015. There's traffic in the other direction too. Ukrainians Andriy and Nikolai heading back to help their homeland fight. We're going home to defend our country, he says. This is our duty. We didn't do anything wrong to Russia. Putin is trying to capture the whole of Ukraine. From wherever they came, they have one destination: safety. Yesterday they were residents. Today, refugees. Mark Lowen, BBC News, on the Poland-Ukraine border.
Well, sport has also been impacted by Russia's actions. The country has been stripped of both a Formula One Grand Prix and the Champions League final. That's been moved from St. Petersburg to Paris, as our sports editor Dan Rowan reports.
Sport has long been used by Vladimir Putin as a means of projecting Russian power. But today it began to apply pressure on the president as an exodus of major events from the country began. Earlier, St. Petersburg was stripped of May's Champions League final. UEFA now looking at how to end its lucrative deal with the competition's title sponsor, Gazprom. The Russian state-controlled energy giant pays the governing body tens of millions of pounds a year. But the stadium that bears its name has now lost club football's showpiece event.
This is just an incredible situation that we have that kind of war within Europe. And therefore, I think the decision that UEFA took was inevitable, and it was the right decision.
Manchester United have had to make a decision themselves over their official airline carrier, Aeroflot.
Today, the club terminating its long-standing multi-million-pound partnership with the Russian national airline after it was banned from operating in the UK. After years of close association, the world of sport starting to turn on Russia.
With Russia due to play a World Cup playoff match next month, UEFA today ordered all its clubs and national teams to play their home matches away from the region.
Withdrawing sports events may hurt even more than the financial sanctions, because this has a huge impact on public opinion. And if imagine Russia do qualify and they're banned, then this will have a massive negative impact for Russian government. So they'll be weighing that up as well.
But just how tough will FIFA be? After all, its president accepted the Order of Friendship medal from Putin after the Russia World Cup. So will he now return it?
My thoughts are really on all the people who are affected by this escalating conflict and nothing else.
Meanwhile, Formula One has confirmed the Russian Grand Prix, due to be held in Sochi in September, is off. Skiing's governing body also pulling its events in the country. And this afternoon, all federations urged to follow suit by the International Olympic Committee. The world of sport sending the Russian regime a clear message. Its isolation intensifying. Dan Rowan, BBC News.
Now we will look at some of the day's other news. And a man has pleaded guilty to murdering Sabina Nessa, the primary school teacher who was attacked in a park in southeast London last September. Kochi Salemi drove 70 miles from his home in Eastbourne to carry out the premeditated but random attack on the 28-year-old teacher. June Kelly has this report.
Sabina Nessa was one of 4 sisters. Her family say they have been broken by her death. And today they were at the Old Bailey to see her killer plead guilty.
There are no words to describe the pain we are going through, which he has caused. It breaks our heart that we cannot see her again. No family should go through what we are going through.
After graduating from university, Sabina Nessa became a primary school teacher. At the end of a working week last September, she set off from her home for a Friday night out. Her short walk alone to meet a friend took her through Cater Park in Kidbrooke in southeast London. On that evening, Kochi Salami drove from his home in Eastbourne to London to carry out what's described as a sexually motivated and predatory attack on a stranger. He was caught on CCTV in Kidbrooke, and so was his car. Salami was also captured on CCTV loitering here in Cater Park. The footage showed how he spotted Sabina and then checked to see if there was anyone else around. He then ran towards her and struck her repeatedly with a weapon which was a metal traffic triangle. Sabina's body, covered by grass, was discovered the following day. After beating her unconscious with 34 blows, Salami strangled her.
I do not want to waste words on this cowardly, evil man, apart from saying we are all relieved he will now undoubtedly spend the vast majority of his life in prison.
Today, the court heard how Kochi Salami had been violent towards his former partner, putting his hands around her throat. Hours before he murdered Sabina, his partner had rejected his sexual advances. Salami was born in the Albanian city of Elbasan, although he's said to have left his home country many years ago. He had been given permission to live in the UK. He killed Sabina 6 months after Sarah Everard was murdered by a serving police officer in another random attack. Their deaths, their families' personal tragedies, have become part of the public debate on the issue of violence against women. Sabina's killer will be sentenced in April. June Kelly, BBC News at the Old Bailey.
The watchdog overseeing the police and Crown Prosecution Service has called for specialist courts to be set up to deal with rape offences in England and Wales. It says they're needed to cut a large backlog in cases and reduce victims' trauma. The watchdog found delays of nearly 2 years before some cases come to trial. The Old Bailey has been told that documents held by the former MP and investigative journalist Chris Mullin contain a confession to murder that could allow police to prosecute one of the people who carried out the Birmingham pub bombings. 24 people died in the attacks in 1974. West Midlands Police are seeking to force Mr Mullin to hand over notes from a 36-year-old interview with a member of the IRA. Chris Mullin says handing over his notebooks would be highly damaging to public interest journalism. And that is all from the News at 10 team tonight. You can keep up to date, of course, with fast-moving events in Ukraine. Newsnight is over on BBC Two now. In a moment on BBC One, it's the news wherever you are. But we leave you tonight with some of the defining images of a week in which the West saw a Russian invasion on European soil. Good night.
This morning we are alone in defending our country, just like yesterday. The most powerful forces in the world watch from afar.
Where can I go? We don't know where to go.
You also see elderly women shaking their fists at the Russians going by. There are Ukrainians who say they are willing to die, but how many have to die to be able to live in their city in the year 2022?